Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Uncensored MMA podcast. I am your host, Mike Fagan. With me, as always, Derek Subotnicki and Matt Roth. You can reach us on Twitter at It's Mike Fagan, or at FightLinkerSubo, or at MattRoth512. You can also reach the show at 410-988-6525. We do have a guest today. Didn't fall through this time. We have Rami Genauer from FightMetric. He'll be joining us hopefully within the next 5 or 10 minutes. But before we talk to him, let's just get right into the biggest story of this past week. Jon Jones arrested for crashing his Bentley and driving under the influence. And I think this is going to be an interesting topic because all three of us, from what I could tell last week on Twitter, are kind of coming at it from different angles. So, Derek, I want to start with you because you seem to be the most pro Jones, so to speak, about this whole issue.
He's a kid was basically the thrust of my quote-unquote defenses of him. I don't think that drunk driving should be legal per se. I mean, goddamn, you don't want to just, say that it's okay in all circumstances. But I do think that Mothers Against Drunk Driving pushed the .08 limit a little bit low. We don't have any information on what exactly Jones was at. The first picture that circulated about his Bentley was a fake, and it turns out the damage wasn't nearly that extensive. He bumped a pole that's still standing. And because it is his first actual offense, there was some rumblings on the blogs earlier about how he got in trouble drifting a car into like a strip club parking lot, but the charges on that were dropped and dismissed. So he doesn't actually have anything like that on his driving record. He's probably going to get a plea deal. I don't think it's going to delay any of his fights. And, he acknowledged in his statement that I gave the haters exactly what they wanted, and damn did they have a field day with it.
Yeah, I thought that statement was a little odd. And I think it just is another example of Malkikawa not having any sort of control on how his fighters respond in the public. Even if Jones actually thinks that stuff, and that's, it seemed pretty straight from the heart and genuine. There's a point where you just tell your fighters or tell your clients, listen, it's best, just offer a blanket sort of generic apology. Don't start attacking your critics. You're not really in a position to do that after you get arrested for a DUI. I mean, like you said, we don't know the exact details of his blood alcohol level and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't seem like a good look to me to go ahead and do that. Matt, before we ramble on any further, what was your take on the whole situation?
Here's my thing, and I guess I tried saying it on Twitter, and 140 characters isn't enough. If you drink, and if you are somebody who has had alcohol before, it's very likely that you've been behind the wheel with drinks in your system. Is that a fair assessment with you guys?
Yes, but that's a little different than what you originally said. But yes, I think that's very fair.
So what my big issue was is that everybody was, saying how, he's an asshole and I've never done that before. If everybody, the way that you guys were tweeting at me that day, is telling the truth, then you've spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on cabs because according to everybody that tweeted at me that day, they've never been behind the wheel with any alcohol in their system, and they've always taken cabs or had designated drivers. Growing up in a town that doesn't have a cab system or a public transit system, a small town, that's completely impossible to do. So to me, my big issue was, hey, let's crucify him, even though every single person who's tweeting about it is guilty of doing the same exact thing at some point in their life, whether it's as an adult or as a young kid who has no idea about consequences. Was Jon wrong? Of course. He shouldn't have been behind the wheel while he was intoxicated, and especially somebody like him, he can afford a driver. But let's not shit ourselves and say, I've never been behind the wheel while drunk before, because everybody who's listening that has had a drink before in their life and gone to a bar or a party has been behind the wheel while a little too drunk to drive, but you've made it home because you knew what you were doing. That's my big issue.
See, and that's where I respectfully disagree. I think there's a very big difference between having had some drinks and then driving home later on in the evening and driving drunk or as you say, on that border of like maybe I'm drunk, but I think I'm going to be okay.
Well, that's a game. That's the thing. That's a game that tens of millions of Americans play every single night. Which is, I've been at the bar for a few hours, but I haven't had a drink in an hour. I'll have a cup of water and go home. I think I'm below a .08 because you don't carry a breathalyzer around with you. It's a matter of, was he swerving around like crazy? What exactly was his level? Was there any kind of reason that he swerved off the road? Because, I mean, if there's a plea deal coming up, there's going to be some kind of dog that ran across the road and he swerved to miss it, and that's what caused the accident. There's going to be some kind of story behind this if there's a plea deal, which there probably will be. So the rush to condemn the guy is just, it's a little misguided to me. When I didn't see anybody, when Lieben did it, it was, wow, what a stupid person, and wow, he needs help, not haha, what a dick.
Well, and I think here's my thing about that. There's totally a possibility that further details come out that he was kind of hovering around the limit and it was something else that caused him to get in an accident. But the circumstantial evidence is he was picked up at 5 a.m. He was involved in a single car accident and he had been drinking. I don't think it's unfair in the court of public opinion for people to come down on someone like that.
But that's the thing, in my opinion. If you've, and as I said, obviously, if you've never drank before, this doesn't apply to you. But if Mike, have you ever gone to the bar and done exactly what Subo said? You spent some time at the bar and you didn't drink that last, you didn't finish your drink, or you didn't drink that last hour, and you had a couple of glasses of water and you drove home. Have you done that before?
Yeah, but there's never been a time where I've been questioning whether it's okay for me to drive. I've always given myself, more than enough time. And I don't get, if I'm driving and I go to a bar, I'm not going to drink to the point where I'm, it's even an issue.
But how do you know that, as Subo said, obviously I do not believe that a squirrel jumped out in front of his Bentley and he decided to save a squirrel and crash his car into a pole. I do not believe that. But until we have any more details on what it is, you have no idea the amount that he drank. You have no idea, what his BAC was, and everybody's crucifying the guy for doing something which everybody has done at some point in their life. That's my entire issue with this, is that if you're going to crucify the guy, that's fine, but let's not shit ourselves and say that I've never done that before, because I will be the first one to admit on this show I have been behind the wheel while intoxicated, and I've luckily never hurt anybody, and I've luckily never hurt myself. But I'm not naive to think that nobody else in the world does that, and I'm not naive to think that I have the right to crucify somebody for doing something which I've done myself, and that's my big issue with everybody right now.
Well, and to move on from the moral condemnation of Jones for this, I think the overall bigger issue in terms of an MMA perspective is, the UFC has pushed Jones as a guy who's squeaky clean in that George St. Pierre type of mold. He's the guy that before his last fight said, I'm a guy that's, you're not going to get caught. I'm not going to get caught doing something crazy like having a DWI on my record. How does this affect, in your guys' eyes, how will this affect Jones going forward? Obviously, I think the Bud Light sponsorship is something that's going to probably get taken away from him.
Yeah, he's going to lose the sponsorships. I mean,
I think the UFC will continue to sponsor him, though. I don't see him not wearing UFC stuff out to his next fight.
No, he'll be a UFC sponsored fighter, and just because we all made a big deal about that, for UFC on Fox 3, Alan Belcher was a UFC sponsored fighter. So John's not the only person. He's going to probably lose the Bud Light one. I think it's going to hurt his standing with Nike and Gatorade, the two ones that he was negotiating with prior to the DUI. He was negotiating with both. It's obviously there's going to be an issue with it. I think it's going to hurt his standing with the UFC. I don't think that they're going to put him in front of the media for a while, just because they need to make sure that he's not going to be an asshole.
Right. They need to see how this plays out. I think that Dana also said pretty much as what you're saying right now. There's not going to be a lot of MMA-related complications as a result of this. He's not going to be suspended. He's not going to miss his next fight. He wasn't injured. So the fight against Henderson, whenever they have it scheduled, is going to go off as planned. What that has to do with what Dana said essentially in his comments about it was, Jones can go one of two ways here. He can just be a regular guy, the quote unquote bad guy that makes a few $1,000,000 doing this and then leaves, which is basically saying, I'm not going to punish him. He's a great fighter and I'm going to keep paying him. Or he can be something more. He can be an icon. He can be the first to drink Gatorade in the octagon and wear Nike and do that kind of shit. And if he wants to do that, he needs to grow up a little bit. And that's kind of the crossroads we're going to see him at now. If anything, I think it makes it a little bit more of an interesting story instead of just boring Christian guy that beats everybody up.
Now, kind of one thing which I want to bring up, I did have a conversation with Malki Kawa last year about basically this entire thing. And I told him, I said, look, your responsibility as a manager is to make sure that your client that you're trying to sell as being this like pristine guy remains pristine in the public. And if that means that when he goes to after parties, you need to get the girl back to the room for him so he doesn't walk out of the club with a random every single night, then that's your job to do that. And Malky didn't really understand that at the time. I think now, you're going to see Jon Jones needs a handler where somebody is basically with him at all times saying, hey, get out of the club, go out the back door instead of the front door. I think that there's going to be some fallout managerially in the way that they actually handle Jon.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you guys are hearing something in the background. I'm actually at my dad's house this week, helping him out with some of his business, and he's got this weird call program on his computer that's makes some weird noises when he gets a call here. So Matt, you're mentioning about Malky and how he's being handled. I remember Dana when Jon won the title said, now that he's got the title, it's going to be a whole lot different for him. He's going to have guys coming at him, trying to get money, trying to cling on to him. And I made the kind of in jest remark on Twitter that it might not be other people that Jon needs to worry about. It might be himself. And you kind of talking about a handler. If you guys are in Jones's camp in terms of his business side of the things, I'll start with you, Matt. Do you try to change course? Do you still try to ride the squeaky clean thing, or do you try to find another way to market Jon in the public and in terms of sponsorships?
What I would do if I'm Jones's camp, I'd try and get ahead of this entire thing. So I'd be having him give seminars and speak at schools about the dangers of drunk driving and blah, blah, blah. And then I'd hire him a full-time driver / whatever you want to call it. Basically, somebody who's with him 24/7, drives him everywhere so he doesn't have to drive anywhere, and handles him from his entire day. There's going to be people that would be willing to do that for, whatever the amount, but he would be saving a lot on public fallout if he had somebody handling him 24/7. And I think that's what they need to do going forward.
And Derek, how would you handle Jones going forward?
I think Roth has a healthy prescription there. He definitely needs some kind of handle. Like, it's such a stupid and avoidable mistake. You really don't hear about this with pro athletes very often because they have the means at their disposal. It's a lot easier when you're, on a team sport because then the team is concerned with your safety more than the actual promotion or the league is. So they're going to have guys out to the clubs. They're going to have a number for you to call if you ever need a ride from anywhere, and they'll bring somebody to bring your car home as well, so you don't have to worry about that. I don't know if that's something that the UFC needs to institute, but it's something that's going to be incumbent upon people that are interested in selling these athletes to take care of before the headache actually occurs. And I think that now with how marketable of a commodity Jones is, we'll see a little bit more movement in that direction towards prevention as opposed to cure.
Yeah, just before we bring on Rami, one of the things that was kind of a big fallout or came up during when Plaxico Burress shot himself in the leg, there was no need for Plaxico to carry a gun because the NFL, if you need security, the NFL will provide security for you so you don't have to, shoot yourself in the leg or carry a gun while you're wearing sweatpants. I think that the UFC, if they want to handle this internally, is have a service where you basically, what Derek is proposing, you call up a number and you have somebody who, a trusted member of the UFC's family, and wherever you are, you can get somebody to pick you up and drive you home so you don't have a Ross Pearson situation, a Chris Lieben situation, or a Jon Jones situation.
See, and I think that we just found Tito Ortiz a job, and that's perfect.
Well
Awesome.
done. So we will bring in Rami Genauer from FightMetric. Rami, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you guys doing?
Oh man, you're on Skype too. Nice and clear call here. So Rami, I know you get asked this question a lot about how FightMetric started. So I actually want to go a step past that. And how did you actually get involved in MMA initially? I know you in interviews you've said that you were covering MMA a little bit for some sports websites or a newspaper or something. But is that how you got interested in the sport, or does it go further than that?
It's really uninspiring. I actually was channel surfing and caught the first episode of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. That was it. So I'm as much of a tough noob as anybody else has ever been. But it blossomed from there, and it was something that I looked at, and I can't say that at first glance I was enamored by it, but I was certainly fascinated by it. So, it turned into a bit of an obsession, just like almost any intellectual pursuit that I go after, and I tried to learn about as much about it as I possibly could, and that's where it took off. And because I was, I like to use the term recovering journalist. You never quite get it out of your system. I was not doing any writing, and I was hoping to do some more. That happened about the same time as I discovered mixed martial arts. So putting those two things together is how I really got involved, starting with MMA Weekly and moving on from there.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of recovering journalists on the show. I do want to say before we go any further, for full disclosure, I have done and continue to do work for FightMetric. Eric, our producer, also has a relationship with FightMetric. So just so we get any of those improprieties out of the way, one of the big things about one of the new stats that you guys have come up with in the last couple of years that I really enjoy is the significant strike stat. And I find that stat gets a lot of resistance with fans online, because I think people take the term significant and try to apply their own meaning behind it. So I think people expect significant strike to mean a strike that causes a fighter to get knocked down or wobbled. Have you experienced that yourself? And how would you describe the stat and how someone should take it to people that aren't familiar with it?
It's probably the number one problem that we have is getting traction, or at least understanding for what it is that we mean by significant strike. More than anything else, a takedown, despite the fact that we have specific criteria for what we mean, at least in your head you can picture it. But when we say significant strike, it could be anything. You're right that I think certain people look at that and they think it means the one that causes the guy to go unconscious. But what it really means, and this is the technical definition, is it's every strike other than little tiny ones that happen at short distance. In the clinch and on the ground, you get these ones where the guys are, really in tight and they're keeping busy. One guy is kind of knocking on the other guy's body or is punching to the head, but he's got no wind up. There's no power behind it. In other people's mind, those are considered nothing. Those we don't call them insignificant strikes because they do have some value. We call them other strikes. But in some people's mind, those other strikes are considered nothing, and they wouldn't include them in a statistic at all. But we can't do that. I can't abide by a situation where there's something happening in a fight and we're not tracking it. So we'll track those. They're still strikes because that's what they are. But they're not ranked to the same level of significance as the ones that when you think of a true strike in your head, those are the ones that we're really talking about when we say significant strikes. And if there's a weakness in it, perhaps it's in the nomenclature, and I wish that we had a better word for it. And if anybody has any suggestions for what you think called, I'd welcome it, because even at this, we've been using it for 3 years. I'd still be happy to change it if there was something that somebody could tell me that would be more, immediately reflective of what it is we're trying to get across.
Yeah, I've often tried to think of alternative names for it because like I said, I've used that stat before, and when I was writing, I would use it a lot. And there's always someone in the comment section that always said, "Well, what is a significant stat?" And I would always direct them to the definition that you gave. And you gave a pretty good presentation about it at the MIT conference. Was that a couple months ago?
Yeah, back in I think it was the beginning of February.
Yeah, and I've tried to direct people to that video because I think that does a really good job of breaking down not only significant strikes but what you guys are doing and the kind of the thought process behind it. And in a related note, when we talk about boxing and CompuStrike, it's very easy to differentiate a power punch from a jab. Everyone knows what a jab with a fist is, and everyone knows that uppercut, a hook, those are the power strikes. In MMA, when we're adding in knees and kicks, how do you differentiate a leg jab, quote unquote, from a leg power strike?
Yeah, this is another one of these cases where we run into problems of nomenclature. We use the term jab in the Oxford English Dictionary sense, not in the boxing, the Marquis of Queensberry sense, where it's not necessarily the lead hand strike that's kind of flicked out that you think of in boxing. It's more meant to be a jab, like you jab somebody in the ribs. It's a short strike, or mainly one that's not thrown with power. So if you contrast one side power strike and the other side not power strike, well, we term that to be a jab, and that's really what it amounts to. Is when you have two kinds of strikes and you compare them against each other, one of them being thrown with power, one of them not being thrown with power, the non-power strike is what we would call a jab.
Okay. Again, it's something that I kind of intuitively kind of understand, and it's something that I get a lot of resistance when I start talking about FightMetric.
Sure. Oh, well, to get to your point about leg kicks, just because I don't want to leave
Yes.
that hanging, when you talk about what would be the difference between a power leg kick and a jab leg kick, think of a jab leg kick as the front. You're standing in a traditional fighter stance. When you throw a flip kick with your front leg, that's something which doesn't have a lot of hip rotation. You're not going to generate nearly as much power as if you're throwing it with your lead leg. Now, you can throw a power kick with your front leg. I'm not saying that as a blanket rule, but if you were trying to think of an easy case of what would be a power kick versus what would not be, think of rear leg power, front leg jab. It's a handy rule.
I think it's a fair rule. Matt, you have a question for Rami?
Yeah. So Rami, there's some question which I don't know if you've ever explained in interviews, but what's the big difference between the FightMetric system and CompuStrike or CompuBox?
That's a difficult thing to answer because I don't have perfect knowledge of what it is that they do. I can tell you about the things that are easy for me to point out. The easiest one that I can point out is that we collect our data officially using slow motion replay. That is when a fight is going on, we're scoring it live, but it's not done in real time because the action happens too quickly for you to be able to get an accurate count of what's happening. So we need to slow things down. Go back and rewatch a striking exchange as many times as necessary. Sometimes, it could be 5 or 10 times. It just depends on the number of strikes that the guys are throwing and how clearly they appear to land. So going back and rewatching things, making sure that you've got your accurate counts in slow motion is extremely important. Another thing that we do that's different is when we talk about official statistics, we have one scorer scoring both fighters rather than having one scorer for each fighter. And we do that because it's very important to have consistency across your internal data. Within a fight itself, we can't allow for the inherent variance which exists between one scorer and another. Despite the fact that we have an excellent system and it's scientific and rigorous, there's just no way to drill out the inherent differences between two different people. The only way that you get consistency within a fight is you have one person doing both. Luckily, using slow motion and pausing allows you to have one person do it. You obviously couldn't have one person scoring two guys in real time. It wouldn't be possible.
Gotcha.
So yeah, on that note, how consistent are after you guys go through the entire process of slow motion and replays, how consistent across the board are the stats? I mean, is it 95%, 96%, or is it in that neighborhood?
95% is what we use for person to person. Meaning, if I score a fight myself and I have another one of our scorers do it, and another scorer do it, another scorer do it, between all of us, we'll all end up 95% consistent. That's the benchmark that we're after. In terms of internal consistency, that is, if I do a fight and then I do it again, so I'm going to do it 2 times in a row, that's actually higher than 95%. It's never going to get you to 100, but it's 97, 96, something like that.
That's a pretty good number. And today you guys released your first MATUA, which is an acronym for matchup analysis. Was created by I have the name here, John Candido, who was a fellow of the FightMetric program, and I believe does some work for ESPN. I guess just briefly explain what Matua is and what you're hoping to do with it, and what the future is for it.
Sure. Well, it's a fight simulation engine, which means that if you feed in, the inputs are a fighter's career statistics. If you take, the one that we released today was Junior Dos Santos and Frank Mir. If you take a look at Dos Santos's career history and Mir's career history, and you feed it into a model that's based on certain assumptions that are derived from a statistical analysis of the sport, it's able to use a Monte Carlo simulation, which is just a method of simulating things and getting taking different variables and ending up with different results. Run that through 10,000 times, and after 10,000 simulations, you get a pretty consistent output of how many times either fighter won, by what method they won, whether it was KO, TKO, whether it was a submission, or whether it went to decision. And then if it was either a knockout or submission, it'll give you the rounds in which it happened. So in the case of Dos Santos and Mir, 45% of the simulations were Junior Dos Santos by knockout or technical knockout. So that was the most frequent result of the simulation engine. All told, Dos Santos accounted for 66% of wins, and Frank Mir was 34% of wins. If we ran it another 10,000 times, and the nice thing is that we can play with this and run it as many 10,000 times as we want. The variance is about 1%, 0.5%. So if it was 66 and 34, it's never going to be more plus or minus 1% on that.
Right, and you kind of made mention to it in the blog post about it, and obviously I think for a lot of people the immediate application would be gambling. Have you gone back and kind of ran it with past fights and kind of compared it to betting lines, or done any sort of analysis against the betting lines?
Yeah, well, that's more of a question for John than for me. But as far as going back and taking a look at victory, so you've got two things. You've got who's going to win, and then you've got value in the line. If the Mir line right now is about 20%, and this thing has 34%, so then it shows that there may be some value in the line. That's something which I don't know. But as far as going back and taking a look at, if we say 66% Dos Santos win, and Dos Santos wins, we'd count that as one in the correct column, and if he loses, it would be one in the incorrect column. Well, going back and taking a look at all this stuff historically, the model actually performs pretty well, and it beats the favorites. Meaning, if you're looking at who the favorite was by the odds, I believe, and again, this is a question for John, that it does better than the odds do.
Yeah, I think. One second, Derek. I think I've seen people run like models of their own, and basically you're just betting on the underdog. And I think if you bet on every underdog, historically you usually come out ahead. Obviously that's not the most efficient way of gambling. But Derek, yeah, go ahead with your question.
Well, I had two quick questions. One, actually, a comment. I'd be interested, now that we have your statistical analysis and you can put in the percentages which each person won, what would be the most statistically unlikely upset that's actually happened previously? I know we kind of have Little Nog and Sokoju as the template for biggest difference on the money lines, but statistically it'd be interesting to see if that was the biggest upset. And the other question I had about this Monte Carlo simulation that you do is when you enter in the statistics, does that take strength of schedule into account, or would somebody like, say, a Hector Lombard have ridiculous stats even though he hasn't really fought anybody of the caliber of, say, like an Anderson Silva or somebody else in that weight class?
Taking them in order, the first question, because the simulation engine as it's currently operated is not automated, meaning it's not something which you'd be able to hit a button and get the answer for every fight that ever happened. There's no way to rank them and say, like, hey, out of all these fights, which one of these had the greatest upset potential, or whatever the case is. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that one. On the second one, strength of schedule is, as far as I know, is included, but I'll say it again. It's a question for John more so than it is for me. I take a little bit of credit, but the credit is due to John Candido. The man is a talented and smart individual, and he was able to put together this thing. I was very happy to be able to lend a hand and give feedback wherever I could, but the heavy lifting was certainly John's.
Now we've talking about strength of schedule, and in another interview, you someone hinted at the idea of creating like a BCS style ranking. Is that something you guys are still working on, or is it something you're still kind of interested in doing?
It's off to the wayside. I don't see it as being a huge priority for us, just because we've shied away from rankings. Rankings are the kind of thing which are, they're pretty well established. You can go and find anyone's rankings, and when it comes to statistical rankings, the FightMetric guys, they do a pretty good job. I don't have a lot of insight into how their system operates, but just as a glance, when we talk about statistics, I always say that the benchmark is there embarrassing data in there? Is there anything in there that you're going to look at and it's too weird? People aren't going to go for it because they just can't accept that that's the case. If you had a statistical ranking system which, for whatever reason, said that like Sokoju was the number 4 light heavyweight in the world or something like that, despite the fact that you were really good everywhere else, it's just too weird. And to their credit, there really aren't a lot of things that are like that. So given that, and given the fact that our data set is necessarily limited, we don't have statistics on every fight that's ever happened. If you go to the Sherdog Fight Finder, you'll find thousands and thousands of fights that you'll never see on our site, just because there was never any video of them, even for guys who are big superstars. I wish passionately that Jon Jones's career history was videotaped, but it isn't. There are fights that are going to be gaps in his record that we'll never even be able to see. And it's a shame, but that's the situation.
That's an interesting point too, because you're from DC, and there's a guy in DC who plays for the Nationals named Bryce Harper, who I think he might be the first baseball player that we're going to have tape of every single home run he's hit at a professional level, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about, because he's the first guy that now that we have smartphones and cheap digital cameras, that people went out to ballparks just to go see him play and to videotape him, which is just kind of a crazy thing to think about, considering where we're at. Another question I wanted to ask you about is the effectiveness scores that you guys use for quote unquote scoring fights. It's another thing that people, I think it's become a little more accepted. I think there's some authority in it, but there's still some resistance based on, the algorithm behind it is still sort of a mystery to a lot of people, and that kind of puts people off. The one question I've always had about it is, as far as I know, you guys base the effectiveness scores on historical scoring up to a certain point. The question I have is, if there is an inherent bias or mistake in judging objectively in history, wouldn't the algorithm be biased toward that mistake, if that makes any sense?
I think I understand the question, but I think the answer is no, because we don't count fights that go to decision in the model. We accept on principle that all decisions are suspect. So if you remove all fights that go to decision from your equations, what you're left with is presumably, and there are exceptions to this rule, but presumably fights in which one of the fighters was the one in control of his destiny and he ended the fight. So in that way, we're able to say, here's what works. And we know it works because objectively, fighters win by using these techniques. Now, yes, there are exceptions to the rule where Jon Jones gets disqualified and he loses, and that happens. But it's a rounding error. By and large, people win their fights by winning. And that's the information that we use to build these models.
And this is sort of a two-part question, and it kind of builds off of what you were just talking about. So what does the system like in terms of what a fighter does? What does it dislike? What are the things? I know just through my work with the company that head strikes are favored more than any other type of strike. So from your vantage point behind the curtain, so to speak, what are the things that the FightMetric algorithm likes and dislikes?
Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, it likes it when you punch the other guy in the head really hard. That tends to be the way that people win fights. It likes it when you achieve back mount. It likes it when you attempt a rear naked choke and you lock it on tight. If we've done things correctly, it likes the things that you inherently know are effective in ending fights. And it doesn't like the things that when you sit there and think about it, you're like, I don't know, do foot stomps really matter? Maybe they do and maybe they don't. So I can tell you from experience, foot stomps don't count for a whole lot. They're considered to be non-power strikes to the leg and the clinch. not a lot of guys win fights by foot stomping. Maybe it contributes, and if it does, we'll be able to see how much, and that contributes. So it's not worthless. Nothing in the system is worthless except for missing. If you throw a strike and it doesn't land, you don't get any points for that. But it comes down sometimes to the question of, well, do leg kicks matter? And what if you get a takedown and the guy immediately gets up? All those things are factored in. But by and large, when you think about the things that are the most effective in your head, those are the things that are most effective in the system.
And then to piggyback on that question, and I don't want to necessarily beg the question here either, but if you were to create a fighter, from scratch, you were the guy genetically creating, this fighter and his skills and abilities, what would be the one most important attribute you would give him? Is it something like knockout power? Is it being able to avoid strikes? What's the one thing that you would want to base a fighter around?
It's likely going to be. There's no one thing, because you can't win with one thing anymore. Those days are over. But generally, the two things that if you can get them, you're in really good shape, are takedown defense and knockout power. If you can do, that's the Crow Cop model back when he could do both of those things. That's it. If you can do those two things, if you can stay on your feet and you can be a better striker than the other guy, then you're going to have a really good chance to win. Takedown ability or control, I should say. It doesn't really make a difference if the control is standing in the clinch or if it's on the ground, but control fighting and submission defense, those are the other two things. So what you really have to come up with, and this should be no surprise, you need one effective offensive style and you need one effective defense that complements whatever your offense is. So if you're able to avoid takedowns and knock people out, you're in good shape. And if you're able to control people and not get submitted, you're also in good shape.
Yeah, and that's something I've always kind of harped on, the tragedy that is Martin Kampmann, who's a pretty solid technical fighter, but I think because he doesn't have that knockout power either at middleweight or welterweight, where he's currently at, it's kind of been his downfall in terms of when he fights the elite guys in the division. But Matt, I believe you have a question?
Yeah, so Rami, you were talking about effectiveness and stuff. What's the difference as far as takedowns go, where you have, take for example, Daniel Cormier's high crotch throw this past weekend versus like an inside trip? How does the algorithm score those differently?
We score much like strikes. There's a power and a non-power. We score takedowns with a slam and a non-slam. So if you get the Daniel Cormier, you get the Randall Plex, or you get any of these things that we can think of, the Jon Jones suplexes and all those businesses, those are accounted for differently than a standard, just a straight double leg or an ankle pick or Dominic Cruz's knee tap of death or whatever the case is. Those are methods by which someone goes to the ground. The thing that you saw from Cormier is something that has the potential to end fights, and I'm sure you guys can think of several fights off the top of your head that end by slam. So they do prove to be more effective than your standard takedown.
Gotcha. So, so for you, how do you guys score somebody? Let's say jumping guard. Is jumping guard the same as a takedown in your algorithm, or no?
It is not. Takedowns, you can't get a takedown unless you end up in the better position. And this is a little bit controversial because you get into fighter styles and who prefers to be where. But by and large, top position's better than bottom position. That's a pretty simple one. So if you're pulling guard, you have put yourself on the bottom. Despite the fact that you might want to be there, if you're Damian Maia, it's not a bad strategy, but it's not a takedown. Even though you got the fight to the ground, the other guy's on top of you.
Okay, gotcha.
I actually do think, even for Damian Maia against guys at the top of the division, it actually probably is a bad strategy. And one other thing on takedowns, and this sort of interested me when I was training for scoring fights way back in the day. You guys score, in terms of takedown attempts, like a single leg, it actually is each yank. Is that still the correct score? Like every time you yank, that's actually a separate attempt?
Sure. I mean, if you think about it logically, every time I, as a fighter, have to defend what you're doing, then that was an attempt that was either successful or not successful. So it's not necessarily a yank per se. It is a sustained effort to bring the other person to the ground. If that manifests itself as one yank on the leg that's serious, then that could be something. But it really depends on the situation, and there are guidelines that dictate the rule here. But more or less, when you think about a guy's ability to stay on his feet, if I'm sitting there and every 5 seconds I'm pulling on you, and then I'm pulling on you, and then I'm pulling on you, I haven't defended one takedown. I've defended several takedowns.
Yeah. I can't believe we've already gone almost a half hour without mentioning anything about your relationship with the UFC now. How has that relationship been going? I think it's been almost 3 years now that you guys have been officially working with them. How are things going with that? How do you hope things go in the future?
It's great. They're wonderful to work with. I'm gratified to know that they like us. That's always a good thing. They appreciate what we do, and as you're seeing more and more, they're starting to integrate the statistics in different ways, whether it be in the live broadcast or some of the materials that the promotion department is being able to give out to members of the media and so forth. So we're doing a lot of things, and my hope is that it continues to grow. I still think that there's plenty of room, there's plenty of space here to expand the use of statistics, or even the places where they're being used to enhance them, so that we use more or we use better. But everything's going swimmingly, and I love it.
I did try to field questions from Twitter. I didn't really get too many, but I did get someone, and I don't know if you know this, Rami. Do you know the German meaning of your last name?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'll let you say it, but it's
For those that don't know, Genauer in German, I'll give. There's a few different definitions here. Particularly, or more exact, or more precise, or more precisely. So, kind of fits in with what Rami does for a living now. Before I let you go, Rami, just want to get your thoughts on the two big fights coming up this weekend, UFC 146. Obviously, both fights kind of have a heavy favorite on one side, but just how do you think it's going to go? Do you agree with the lines makers? Do you think like the Matua showed today that there might be some value on Mir? Is there going to be value on Antonio Silva as well?
Well, I think the value on Mir is pretty astute, despite the fact that anybody sane knows that Dos Santos by TKO is the most likely scenario. I don't think anybody who's not related to Frank Mir is going to give you a different answer. But as far as Antonio Silva goes, I don't see a lot of it. I think Velasquez is pretty well valued, and I'm not sure exactly what the line is on that fight. I don't really pay attention to him that closely. As we get closer and closer to the fights, they become more and more important. But the man's a beast. He got hit by Junior, and that was it. But I see Kane taking that one pretty handily.
And so we'll let you go. Is there anything you want to plug? I know you guys have the Twitter, the FightMetric Twitter account. I was asking Erica earlier if you guys had a personal account at all. But yeah, if you have anything to plug, and then we'll let you go.
No, I don't. I actually have no social networking presence personally at all. I don't know about you guys, but I don't tweet, and I don't have a Facebook account. My wife has a Facebook account, so that takes care of all the stuff. She lets me know when it's somebody's birthday that I need to worry about. As far as Twitter goes, it's okay. I don't have that much time anymore to follow, so it doesn't become like a priority of mine to join Twitter and to have a feed that gives me everything that everyone says. I figure that if it's important enough, it probably makes its way in front of me eventually anyway. But no, I have nothing to plug. I appreciate you guys having me on. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to doing it again sometime. Maybe next time I can find out the resolution to your hot dog sandwich question.
Okay, wait.
Oh, no.
Before you go, what is your thoughts on hot dogs, and are they sandwiches?
No, they're not. But I don't think a hamburger is a sandwich either. I don't know. I'm not from Boston, so that one never got me. But I heard this from Erica, but I never got a chance to listen to you guys hash it out. Although it sounds like it was a pretty painful discussion.
Oh yeah, it was totally painful. So neither are sandwiches, but a lobster roll is a sandwich.
I'd have to think about that one.
See, it's crazy.
I don't know. I feel like there's not a lot of hot sandwiches, but there should be. I mean, like, cheesesteak's a sandwich, right?
Exactly.
Grilled cheese is a sandwich.
Grilled cheese is a sandwich. That's true.
Yeah, but if you put like Italian sausage in it, it becomes a grinder.
No.
Yeah, the hot grinder. That's not a sandwich, or it's a grinder. It's basically a hot sandwich.
We call that a significant cheesesteak, but no one knows what it means.
And with that, I will let you go, Rami. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, take care, guys.
Thanks, Rami.
Bye-bye.
Oh, that totally made that whole interview worth it. The thing I love about Rami is that if you ask him a question and he doesn't know, he'll tell you he doesn't know. A lot of people try to bullshit you.
That's a smart person. The smart person is I don't know.
It's also someone that you can trust. If someone's willing to admit in a conversation that they don't know something, that's someone that I'm willing to put some trust behind.
Well, really, when somebody comes to your house and like their headlight is hanging off their car, and you're like, "What happened to your car?" I don't know. I don't trust that guy.
Yeah.
Where's my wallet?
Wait, does that happen? Does that happen?
Yeah,
I got family issues you guys wouldn't even understand. All right,
Man.
I'm just leaving it at that.
You talk about things, man, sometimes I have no idea what you're talking about.
I don't want to get. This is a place where a backstory would probably be really, really helpful, but it would just be painful for me to tell. So I don't want to get into it. But suffice it to say that I don't know is not always a satisfactory answer.
That's true. Before we get into UFC 146 coming up this weekend, Bob Sapp somehow made his way into the news, mostly through a highly talked about interview he did with Ariel Helwani on Tuesday, I believe. There was a lot of discussion, and I had a lot of interaction with people on Twitter about Sapp and what he does and whether it's deplorable behavior or if it's something that is worth condemnation. And my thing with Bob Sapp is this. Everyone knows what Bob Sapp is doing right now. And if you're being duped by Bob Sapp, I think that tells us more about you than it does about Bob Sapp. It's very clear to me that Sapp is going into these fights to collect a paycheck, and once he gets hit, he's going to just crumple. I personally don't have any issue with that. I mean, unless he's throwing fights for, if it turns out he's been gambling on fights on the other side, and at this point, I don't know why bookies would even take money on Bob Sapp fights, but do either of you guys, is Bob Sapp a moral scourge that needs to be removed from MMA, or is it just the dude that people kind of get to make fun of from time to time?
See, I actually, I said this in a post I wrote about him. My post on Bob Sapp did 10,000 reads, so I'll always write about Bob Sapp. I'll always do it. No, but I'm not being an asshole by saying that, because whenever I wrote about Bob Sapp on Head Kick Legend or on Bloody Elbow, the post also did crazy amount of traffic. People want to read about Bob Sapp. People care about Bob Sapp. And, the fact that he's going to be able to walk away from the sport with hopefully a lot of money, because at one point he had like a mega store in Tokyo that sold everything from T-shirts to action figures to DVDs to dildos, and then he made all that money in K1 and Pride, and now he's making $50K a fight or $40K a fight. Bob Sapp, he's going to be able to retire from the sport with a whole bunch of money, and he's not going to have any brain damage. I'm okay with what he's doing, because I think at this point we all know what he's doing, so you can't get pissed off.
He pretty much admitted it without saying as much on Ariel's show. The one thing that I kind of was most perturbed about is, Ariel kind of went through his schedule this year. I think he's got something between the fights he's already had and the fights he's got coming up, something like 6 or 7 fights in 2012 through September. And, if you're making $30,000 a pop, that's, $250,000. And Ariel kind of made the remark of, I wish I could get paid to do a job half-assed. And the counter I have to that is find someone to pay you to do a job half-assed. If Bob Sapp if promoters are willing to give him $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to fight, Bob Sapp would be a moron to turn that down.
Yeah, I mean, I would do that. If somebody's willing to pay you for the absolute bare minimum effort, why are you not going to do that?
Yeah, and there's also the irony of Ariel making that statement while giving Bob Sapp 30 to 40 minutes of an interview on his show.
That's the thing. You can condemn it and say that it corrupts fighter records and it throws things off. He already exists outside of the realm of where he can actually be punished by anyone other than a promoter. He fights where it's unregulated. He goes wherever the money is decent, and that's normally in a place that doesn't have an athletic commission to mess with him. he's not making 265 anytime soon, so he won't be fighting in the States. That's not even a goal of his. But ultimately, what you can do is turn a blind eye to it. You don't need to promote it, because the more eyes that are on it and the more, audio content there is with him on it, defending it and explaining it. And basically, Sapp did the same thing, blaming the fans and the promoters, saying, hey, they buy the tickets, And the only reason the bookies are taking lines on the fight is because there are still idiots out there willing to bet on Bob Sapp.
And the other thing is, I mean, look, if at this point, if you're paying for streams to see Bob Sapp fight, you can't complain that Bob Sapp is duping you in any way.
Yeah. It's basically fleecing idiots out there, and you don't have to be comfortable with it. But and Ariel received a number of tweets during the show saying, "Cut him off. Like, let's just end this. Nobody wants to hear this shit. We're not interested in his story anymore. He's clearly not a fighter. He's just a guy collecting a check, and there is a difference." So that's the way a lot of fans feel. If you're not out there trying to earn and trying to be the best, I'm not interested in seeing you if you got big Ripley muscles. So Ariel has a little bit of responsibility there for not ending it at that point and saying this has nothing to do with MMA anymore. I'm cutting it off.
And to connect us to another story from this week that I somehow forgot about until just now, and that we'll get into after the UFC 146 talk, when one of the members of the commission asked Nick Diaz if isn't your number one job to win fights, and Nick, in a moment of brilliance, said, no, my job is to provide for myself and my family. And not that throwing fights, not that making money is always a shield from any sort of condemnation of ethics or morals, but that's ultimately what Bob Sapp's trying to do. He's trying to provide for himself and his family, and while I don't know if it's the most ethical thing in the world to do, like I've said, I think the blame falls more on the promoters willing to give this guy money to continue doing it.
Well, and the flip side of that would be that I quickly need to know that if Bob Sapp doesn't have any money at the end of his MMA career, that's Bob Sapp's fucking fault. He's made a ton of money.
Yes, but that might be why he's doing this. I mean, it might just be one of those things where pro athlete makes a bunch of money, piddles it away, and now has to continue to fight, or quote unquote fight, to make ends meet.
So, kind of big deal. According to our buddy Front Row Brian on Twitter,
oh god,
Anthony Johnson has missed weight again.
For who and where and what weight?
He's supposed to be fighting at middleweight tomorrow at Titan 22. So Anthony Johnson was supposed to weigh in at 185, and he weighed 194.2.
What a big fatty. I hope his opponent says, fuck it, I'm not fighting.
Dave Branch, I guess, got word, and he cut to 189.2 and didn't make 185. It was probably going to be agreed to be a catch weight, but Jesus Christ, man.
Shouldn't do it. The next Anthony Johnson opponent, Dave Branch, if you're listening, and you're not. But if anybody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows Dave Branch, no, don't take the fucking fight. Fuck that guy.
That's absolutely insane. Look, I know that we have to talk about 146 and we still have to talk about Strikeforce this past weekend, but Anthony Johnson, like, what the fuck happened to that guy?
Yeah, and if he wants a ticket back to the UFC, missing weight on a regional show is that might be the death knell in the journey back to the big show. With his issues in the UFC, and now not even be able to make weight for a show, a small show, probably on HDNet, that doesn't speak well for your commitment as a fighter. And that's something that the UFC absolutely hates.
Like that's absolutely atrocious, man. And I'm a fan of watching Anthony fight. I'm a fan of, I like his fighting style, but holy shit.
Yeah, he's a guy, after his first couple of fights in the UFC that people were kind of tossing around, presuming that he progressed as a fighter, as a guy who could challenge Georges St. Pierre. And I think that notion is probably all but erased at this point.
It's
a bold statement, Mike. You're going out on a limb there, buddy.
But
Anthony Johnson's going to make you eat those words in 2 years when he beats GSP in Toronto.
But how the fuck did he make 170 if the guy can't make 185?
And the thing is, the last time he actually made 170 against Charlie Brenneman, he looked amazing.
Well, are you talking about in the fight? Because I mean, beating up Charlie
Yeah,
Brennan isn't exactly.
that was right after Brenneman beat Rick Story, so it wasn't. I mean, it was a terrible matchup for Brenneman because he wasn't going to out wrestle and sit on Anthony Johnson, but Johnson looked awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just another example of a guy kind of probably not living anywhere near his potential. But we do need to get to 146 here. It is a pretty big show, although it is completely different than what it was originally scheduled to be. We'll just start off right in the main event. Junior Dos Santos, Frank Mir. We talked a little bit about it with Rami earlier. Um, do any of you guys are any of you guys going to take Frank Mir in this fight? Because it's one of those things that just in the build up, I first thought, wow, Junior's going to kill him. It's going to be pretty one sided. But as it's gotten closer and closer, I'm starting to give Frank a little more of a chance. And I don't know if that's just hype and the primetime videos, or if it's a reasonable thing to come to a conclusion.
No. What you're doing is giving Frank Mir credit for being a really good fighter, which he is. He's a top 5 heavyweight. When it's all said and done, he's going to be one of the top heavyweights of the last decade when they look back on this era for being, a UFC heavyweight champion, one of the only guys to beat Brock Lesnar, one of the guys that beat him, the only guy that beat him before his injury troubles with the diverticulitis. I don't know why that word slipped my memory, but it's a terrible matchup for him. He can't take Junior Dos Santos down. I don't remember Frank Mir having really good takedowns. He's not going to outbox him. There's not a lot of avenues for victory here unless Dos Santos fucks up, and we really haven't seen him do that in the octagon. So a bet on Mir it's a blind shot in the dark.
Matthew?
Junior
I know
Dos
you're probably...
Junior Dos Santos is going to absolutely smash Frank Mir. Frank Mir is really good, and obviously he's improved a lot since he was the champ the first time. But Frank Mir is going to get smashed by Junior Dos Santos.
And I do want to point out our producer Erica pointed me and the boys here to a tweet from Matt Bishop. According to him, who he talked to Joe Kelly, I assume that's someone in Titan Fighting Championship.
Yeah, the promoter.
The contracted weight for the Anthony Johnson bout was 195, so Johnson did not miss weight.
So at front row, Brian is wrong and hideously full of shit again.
Yeah, I even on something that's not even sourced, or something that's he had to find a source for it. He just totally fucked up. He probably saw the weight and then just assumed that it was wrong.
Sorry, Dave Branch. If anybody knows anyone that knows Dave Branch, tell him I was kidding.
But yeah, I generally think you guys are probably on the mark here. It's just one of those things. I've always been a Frank Mir hater as a fighter. I always think he's overrated.
Which is weird because he's an outspoken atheist and probably politically agrees with us a lot.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing too. Even as a personality, he's probably the one guy in all of sports that I've gone most back and forth on whether I like him or dislike him, because I see him too.
I can only speak for me, but I feel like for you, maybe it was during the Lesnar build-up to the second fight when he said that shit about wanting him to be the first guy to die in the cage, and it just seemed really obsessive and kind of reaching, like the selling of that fight.
I don't know what it is. I mean, even like when he did the WEC broadcast, even within the broadcast, I would go back and forth because you get Frank Mir with two neutral guys in the cage. He's very well spoken, very good at breaking down what's going on, and then you get him with a guy like Miguel Torres in the cage. It's like, all right, Frank, we get it. Like you love Miguel Torres, like you can stop.
Miguel Torres too.
Did you suddenly get drunk?
Nope. No. But look, I mean, Frank Mir, he's a very, very talented guy, and I would say that as far as submitting guys at heavyweight, he's probably the best. I just think that he's going to have a hell of a time trying to get the fight to the ground against Dos Santos.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest issue, unless somehow Frank Mir catches Dos Santos with a punch and kind of shocks the world once more, because it's the same guy who somehow submitted Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira when he was probably punch drunk as hell at that point. But we'll move on into the co-main. Another fight with a pretty heavy favorite, Cain Velasquez fighting Antonio Silva. Cain was originally supposed to fight Frank Mir, which I think might have been even worse of a matchup for Frank. Antonio Silva was a guy that there's times where I watch him, I'm like, wow, this guy's a monster. This guy has the potential, all the potential in the world. And then there's times I watch him. Specifically, I remember always the Fabricio Verdum fight, where it just doesn't look. He just looks like a big dude that can't do much.
His boxing was really on point in the Fedor matchup. I think that Cormier kind of showed that he's legit and that wasn't a big upset after he beat Fedor. I like Silva, but I think that Velasquez is kind of going to do what Cormier did to him, which is he's going to be littler. He's going to have the option for a takedown when he wants it, and the speed of his hands are going to make all the difference because Bigfoot is pretty goddamn slow.
Yeah, and you look at his record; it's an interesting record. He's got 3 losses, two to pretty elite heavyweights in Daniel Cormier and Fabricio Verdum, and then one in his 8th professional fight in Bodog against Eric Pele, which is kind of a blemish, a pretty big blemish on your record. And he really, outside of Fedor, he doesn't really have any great wins. He beat Arlovsky back in 2010, but as we've seen from Arlovsky since then, that's not exactly something that, beating Arlovsky isn't what it might have been 4, 5, 6 years ago. But other than that, it's guys like Mike Kyle, who he almost got trounced by, Jim York, Yoshihiro Nakayo, Justin Eilers, Rico Rodriguez. And the Rico Rodriguez fight is another fight that he didn't look great in and had, it was a split decision, and he could have lost it just as much as he won it. But yeah, but he's still a guy that's so big that and he's got so much power that if he gets Kane in a bad spot, he could do something that could change the tide of the fight. Dead air.
Shut up. He's got the power. It's and he actually has some ground skills too. Like he's got some jiu-jitsu credentials. I just think that again, we haven't seen Velasquez really do anything good since he beat up Lesnar. He didn't look. He got clipped by Dos Santos after a long injury layoff. We didn't even really get to see him test out that rotator cuff to see if it's healthy. If there's an issue there, then Bigfoot definitely has the size to kind of wear him down and sit on that joint and hurt it a little bit, even during a takedown attempt. But I got Velasquez.
Yeah, I got Velasquez as well. I think that Antonio Silva, he's good. He's a really good fighter, but I think that a lot of his advantage comes from just being a huge guy, and really really hard to handle. But I think that Cain Velasquez is super strong, and he should be able to handle and outmuscle Antonio Silva in the cage.
And then we'll just run through the bottom 3 fights in the main card here real quick. Derek, give me your thoughts on Roy Nelson, Dave Herman in 140 characters.
I can't translate that shit into speech, but Nelson.
Okay, you're at like 80 characters.
But Nelson is finally going to win. Hashtag that was the plan the whole time. Fuck you guys.
You just went over. So we got tweet longer right there.
I never use that shit. That's cheating. I'm not going to click on a link to see your text message to me, you fuck.
So I think that Roy Nelson finally picks up his win. Dave Herman hates BJJ and doesn't believe in the guard. And Roy Nelson
doesn't think it works. I just don't think BJJ works.
He just doesn't believe it in BJJ. I think that Roy Nelson is going to get him to the ground, pass to side control, get crucifix, and then Dave Herman's going to have the moon on his face.
And how you going to get the moon off?
How you going to get the moon off you?
Our buddy on Twitter, PDL MMA, tweeted a question a couple of days ago about who has the worst fight IQ in MMA. I don't know if this is the guy that got mentioned, but I think Dave Herman might be in the running. He might have the worst fight IQ, at least at the heavyweight division of the UFC.
I feel like career goes to George Gurgel, but recent example.
That was my answer too.
Probably be Thiago Alves shooting for that takedown against Martin Kampman. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, but that's a kind of an isolated thing. I don't remember Alves making egregious decisions like that in the past. Although his game plan against George St. Pierre wasn't exactly the most sound either.
Yeah, that's why I tried to break it down between, like I said, a career award and the most recent what are you doing example that I can think of. I mean, Herman had like 5 of those against Einamor. You're like, what was that? But
quick encapsulation again, Derek. Stipe Miocic versus Shane Del Rosario.
I can't go against my Serbian brother in here. Everybody from the Balkans got to stick together.
He's from Ohio.
Oh, that's where. Hey, so is my grandpa. All right, there are a
Sorry,
lot
no,
of Serbians.
my bad. He's from Indiana, I believe.
A lot of Serbians from the Midwest. Barberton, Ohio, is lousy with them. I mean, you get a lot of names in the phone book that end with vowels and don't belong to Italians. Okay.
I'm just saying that he's not Serbian. He's
No,
American.
he's. If you wear the fucking flag, then we include you. Okay. Most people that are actually from our best Serbian athlete in the last 30 years has been like Vladi Divac. So we cling to what we have when it comes along.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Matthew.
Are you just quoting Sublime songs now?
Yep. I think that Shane Della Rosario, he should win that fight. The only thing that scares me is that he has the ring rust from a almost career-ending car accident.
The interesting thing about that fight too is it's actually a pretty good fight between two undefeated guys at the heavyweight division, but wasn't originally scheduled. It just one of those fights that just sort of happened based on guys getting hurt and guys having to pull out. Stipe is actually the minus 160 favorite in this fight, and I'm going to go with him as well. And the last fight, and the fight that I'm sure Mr. Sabatiki is most looking forward to, Stefan Struve, LeVar Johnson. And we talked about this a little bit last week, but let's
Yeah,
rehash it.
yeah. It's the only thing that brought a smile to my face about the unfortunate Mark Hunt injury is that I didn't have my loyalties as torn in this fight as I previously would. I like LeVar Johnson. Seems like a very honest guy, fun to have a beer with, exciting to watch. But I love me some Stefan Struve, and I think that he's going to win this one by not eating a terrible shot to the face. I think that Johnson has the aggressive part in him where that if Struve back hits the ground, even if he's kind of pulling guard, Johnson will follow him without really thinking about the repercussions, and I think we'll see a submission early.
I think that LeVar Johnson wins. You can't block his punches. We learned that from no, but it sounds really stupid, but you can't block his punches with 4-ounce gloves because then you get you're punching yourself in the face effect. And we saw it with Joey Beltran, and we saw it with Pat Barry. LeVar Johnson hits like a truck, and Stefan Struve is pretty chinny for a guy that's 24 years old.
Yeah, and it's actually funny that you bring that up. I read an article recently. It was an old article about Rocky Marciano. I don't remember who he was fighting and what the coverage was about. But the writer was talking about the idea that Marciano threw so many punches and threw them so hard that blocking them with your arms didn't really help you very much because it would just fuck your arms up.
Yeah.
And we saw in the Barry fight that's kind of the same principle here for LeVar. My thing always with Stefan Struve is this: if he can't maintain and control distance, he's in a lot of trouble. And given his length and his reach, someone should be giving him who's that fucking kickboxer, guys? Why am I not thinking of his name?
Semi Schill.
Semi Schill. Someone should be teaching him how to fight like Semi Schill. In terms of his striking, and
but here's the thing: he's training with Daniel Guida, but Daniel Guida isn't a puncher; he's a kicker. Like Daniel Guida's his entire game plan is, get you to come in so he can kick the shit out of your legs.
But he's also been landing beautiful counter left hooks lately that have been knocking
people out.
I love Daniel Guida.
I love Daniel Guida, but Daniel Guida is scary because he can kick the shit out of you. With his legs, and his kicks are fight-ending kicks. So if FightMetric was watching a Daniel Guida fight, they would have to change their entire algorithm to support his leg kicks. The one funny thing about Stefan Struve is he's almost 7 feet tall now. He's 6'11" and a half, and an 84.5-inch reach. So he needs to fight like a big guy now.
Yeah, and
enormous.
It's something that he's made minor improvements to, but he's still, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights in the UFC already, and he's still young. He's only 24, but given the amount of fights that he's had and just the physical tools he has, it just is completely frustrating to watch him, let guys get in close to him and punch him in the face. And he's one of those guys too, like Martin Kampmann, that if he gets punched in the face, it looks like he's about to die, even if he's okay.
What the fuck was the UFC thinking, putting him in his first UFC fight against Junior Dos Santos?
That was kind of mean, and that was right after Dos Santos murked Werdum. That wasn't Dos Santos' debut either. They already knew that Dos Santos. He already knocked out a guy that was bitching about not getting a title shot in Struve's UFC debut. That was a little bit of a lambs to the slaughter situation.
Well, to be fair though, at that point, Dos Santos was only 7-1. He was only a year removed from losing a fight to Joaquim Ferreira in Brazil.
I don't know, well, it was a rotten fight for him to do for his UFC debut. He shouldn't have been fighting Werdum for his first fight. So Struve got screwed a little bit like Dos Santos did, just Dos Santos rose to the occasion a little bit better.
Yeah.
Well, the problem at heavyweight though is if you need a guy that's sort of a body, sometimes guys are just going to get screwed and get fights like that.
You can always call Joey Beltran.
you can always count on Joey Beltran.
There's always money in the banana stand.
I'll let you guys decide. Do you guys want to talk about last week's Strike Force, or do you want to talk about the hearing at the Nevada Commission?
Let's talk about the hearing, because that was fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. Here's my thing, and Ben Folks wrote about this, and for a large part, I agree with the sentiment. I think the big issue that I have, and I've seen this with other people as well, is framing it as Nevada Commission allows testosterone, punishes marijuana. I think that's an extremely disingenuous way of presenting what happened. That said, the absurdity of watching the Sonnen hearing and then watching the Diaz hearing, it was just outrageous. The thing that really bugged me was the commission chair, and I'm blanking on his name.
It's Evan Zeno.
Yeah, he basically, after Diaz's lawyer was making the case in his opening remarks, basically said, listen, we're not really concerned with how Nick got his medical marijuana license or why he's been prescribed that, and then proceeded to get into why he got his medical marijuana license and why he was prescribed that. And then it got to the point, it was almost like a Monty Python sketch, where it got to the point where the commission was asking Nick, why didn't you finish high school? Was it because of your ADHD? Was it because you moved around a lot? Was it like, and it was at that point, it was like, why is this relevant to what's going on right now?
They asked him how the munchies were.
Yeah.
They asked him about getting the munchies. Like, they wanted detailed experience about getting the munchies. That's ridiculous. And whoever decided that Nick Diaz should have been there and speaking, like, his lawyer fucked up by having Nick speak.
Well, it would have looked worse if he wasn't there. It would have looked a lot worse if he just didn't show up.
Oh, of course he would have, but I mean, Nick was being brutally honest with them. Like, super honest to, like, explaining that sometimes he doesn't go to the dispensaries and he buys weed straight from friends.
That was like the dumbest thing. It was just, whatever's easier. I'm just like, Nick, don't tell them that you're buying it on the black market.
Like, having Nick answer some of those questions was ridiculous. Like, him saying, oh yeah, after I told you I wouldn't smoke weed again back in 2007, I went home immediately and smoked weed.
Yeah, and his lawyer fucked up a couple of times, too. His lawyer, at one point, they asked him, well, how are we supposed to know that, he had this in California? And he's like, well, don't you guys read the blogs? I mean, everybody knows that Nick likes to smoke weed.
No, but then on the other hand, the state completely misunderstood what WADA testing is.
Yes.
And so they misquoted, like, for 10 minutes. They misquoted and misunderstood the WADA testing rules, or the WADA. They completely misquoted and misrepresented and misunderstood the WADA testing.
That's the one thing that's always kind of struck me watching commission hearings, and this goes back to watching the entirety of the Chael Sonnen's hearing with the California Commission back in 2010, is just how inept the commission members are about their own rules and their own guidelines. They're constantly asking for clarification, and not in the sense, there's. I understand asking for like a legal clarification and kind of getting in more specifics, but there's times where they clearly just don't know what their procedures are, what their policies are, and that's part of the reason why these things always come off as amateur hour. But the thing and the other problem I think that Nick had, there was a point where his lawyer was almost attacking the commission, and then the commission was saying, well, what are you saying, that our policy on marijuana is wrong? Has it been wrong for the last few years? And it became this almost back and forth, very odd discussion where Nick's lawyer was kind of calling the commission out, but didn't want to come out and say it, and the commission was picking up on it and trying to defend themselves without taking any sort of responsibility for how they view marijuana. I think the overall biggest thing about this to me is the amount of marijuana metabolites that Nick had in his system is so remote that this shouldn't even be something that caused him to test positive in the first place, or it shouldn't be something that they're testing for.
It was absolutely insane, and the fact that this was it went on for 4 fucking hours.
Yeah, I eventually had to turn it off because it was like, okay,
I had to do play-by-play of it, and if you want to see like how slowly I lost like grasp on reality, follow that. Go read that play-by-play. Like I tried doing it during like giving real updates during the Chael Sonnen portion, and by the time at the end of the Chael portion where they're chewing them out, and then they say, "Oh, hey, we want you to be and we want you to join us in an advisory role to talk about TUE and testosterone." Are you fucking kidding?
Yeah.
Advisory, sorry.
Advisory, yeah. and again, my thing is it's annoying to see people conflate the points. And it kind of goes back to when some people were saying like, oh, MMA is banned in New York, but child porn is allowed. It's
Shut up, Ariel.
trying to kind of compare the issues isn't, like I said, the absurdity of them back to back kind of heightens the whole issue. But I'm someone that I have no problem with testosterone being used in a therapeutic sense. I think if you look at a guy like Dan Henderson, it's are people going to be upset 50 years from now that Dan Henderson had X amount of years added to his career because he was taking testosterone? I hope not. I don't think people will be.
Well, to be fair and full disclosure, you also think they should be allowed to shoot horse roids into their balls before they go out there. So.
Oh yeah, they should be able to take PCP and anything. I mean, anything that makes them a better fighter.
They should be doing lines in between rounds.
Yeah. They should be getting injections
issue,
mid-fight.
The only issue I have is that if you have, Dan Henderson and Chael Sonnen and Randy Couture and Todd Duffy and all these dudes who have trained together at some point, Chael, Dan, and Randy all used to train together. Todd Duffy trains at Randy's gym, Extreme Couture, and they all need TRT. So,
well, I should interrupt you.
It's not like your period, syncing up with another girl's period.
I should interrupt you that Randy has never admitted, or no one has ever officially reported Randy Couture was ever.
No, yeah, I've known that it was it was hormone replacement therapy that he had. I don't know if it was specifically testosterone.
That's what Joe Rogan said once. That was reconned out of I think one of those primetime shows or behind the scenes shows. But he's never. I think he's actually gone after people legally that have claimed that he has used it. So I just want to put that out there.
So that's alleged,
right?
That's alleged. But my issue is that again, you don't get 4 different dudes or 5 different dudes all training together, all having low testosterone. It's like it's not something where it's contagious, and it's not something that's that's common among men.
Obviously, the real question is what's happening to that testosterone in the Extreme Couture gym, and what are they doing with it afterwards?
Are you talking about the testosterone that they're naturally losing? Or
that's what I'm saying. If they're all at the same level and then they go to that gym and they're suddenly low, there's a deficit there, and it's created by something. They must have a vat underneath the floor.
No, it's obviously microwaves.
It could be some sort of like old school Batman villain, and he's slowly drawing it out of him somehow.
Slowly draining my testosterone. I could have stopped you if I had my testosterone. No.
So let's move on. Kind of got to run through this stuff quick. Strikeforce show on Saturday. I know, Derek, you probably just want to get right into this main event and just dance all over the grave of Josh Barnett.
Oh, hooray and fucking yay. Yes, I've been waiting this whole show for this. Daniel and Josh Barnett got his ass kicked. I haven't been able to say that since the last time he fought a top 10 heavyweight, which was at the end of 2006 when I wasn't even watching the sport yet. So my whole knowledge of Josh Barnett has been as a cheater and an overrated fighter that beat a bunch of nobodies and fucked up a beautiful card against Fedor. That Affliction 3 card was going to be completely awesome, and I wanted to see it. Despite my fervent pro-Zuffa views, I did buy both Affliction pay-per-views, and I was looking forward to buying the third until Barnett fucked it up with his third positive test, second that was actually after the commissions had instituted a punishment regime. Before they had done that, he tested positive before when Pride came to Nevada. So we're still waiting on the results from this one. I don't give him a pass on this one yet because I don't know if he roided, but if he did, he was using the wrong ones because he got beat up by a better wrestler, athlete that was actually smaller than him in the weight category, but made his stand-up look like shit. Knocking out Pedro Hizzo 2 years ago doesn't mean anything. Fuck Josh Barnett. Hooray.
Yeah, the thing going into the fight, it was always a bad style matchup for him because, Barnett's biggest strength in this fight was going to be on top of Cormier, but he doesn't have the wrestling, and not many guys at heavyweight probably do. I don't know if anyone has the wrestling at heavyweight to consistently take Daniel Cormier down. And Cormier has really emerged in the last couple of fights as having really, really good boxing. My thing with Barnett is in those last 2 rounds when you're that far behind and you probably have to finish to win the fight. I don't know why he isn't just shooting takedowns or trying to somehow get in the clinch and try to take him down. And obviously, it's still kind of pushing the rock up the hill kind of strategy. But he was clear that he wasn't going to beat up Daniel on the feet, and his best spot is to get on top. And you might get hurt badly doing it, but at that point you're at a real underdog strategy situation, and he really needed to get the fight on the ground and get on top. But at the same time, I thought the fight was super entertaining, and even in a loss, I thought Barnett did enough to not make it one of those boring one-sided beatdowns. I don't know what that was.
It was me blowing a raspberry because he lost every round of that fight.
Oh, he definitely lost every round, but I thought they were still entertaining rounds. Do you agree, Matthew Roth?
Well, I mean, Dan Cormier, I think we can agree is probably the top heavyweight prospect. Is that?
Oh, go fuck yourself. Go fuck
yourself. He's not
yourself.
a prospect. He's not a prospect anymore. He's a top 10 guy.
Anyone calling Daniel Cormier a prospect needs to get their head examined.
He was a prospect when he fought Monson. After he fought Monson, you said decent heavyweight with potential. Then he beat Bigfoot, and you said, oh shit, and now he's here.
Okay, fine. If he's not a prospect, who do you see him having trouble against in the heavyweight division?
I think he's a tough matchup for anyone. I don't think there's anyone at heavyweight that he is going to be a significant underdog to.
The most fun fight I can imagine for him is against his teammate, and it's not going to happen.
I don't know about that.
He would crush Cain.
You think that Cain Velasquez wouldn't even be competitive? I think Cain's definitely the better boxer, and MMA wrestling is different than Olympic wrestling, so we'd have to see how.
You think that he's better you think that Cain's the better boxer than Dan Cormier?
Yeah, I think that Cain last year would have absolutely decimated Jeff Monson in 2 minutes, and it took Cormier 15. So I don't think Cormier has closed that gap in the last 2 fights.
That's not exactly the best argument, though.
I think that Dan Cormier could have been anything in life. He could have been a fat, pudgy point guard in the NBA. He could have been a running back. He could have done anything, and he would have been an all-star athlete.
How do you feel about Velasquez?
I can't say a thing about Velasquez.
I can't say a bad thing about him. I just know that he's, they both have the same number of losses in MMA. Velasquez has the much stronger strength of schedule, and he has more finishes. He's been a finisher.
Yeah, but Dan also wanted to get experience in the cage.
Yeah, the thing about comparing that sort of stuff is if you look at his fights before Jeff Monson, all but one he finished, and there's nothing wrong with a guy who has, especially at his age when he needs to get that cage time. There's nothing wrong with him knowing he's in no danger against Jeff Monson, just sort of carrying the fight.
And that's completely fair, and that's all well and good, but I definitely don't think there's enough of a basis to say that Velasquez would get run over by Cormier.
No, I don't think so either. But
he would get trucked.
I think you're a man on an island in that opinion. I don't think Velasquez gets trucked by any heavyweight. And I probably feel the same way about Cormier. I don't think Cormier would be smashed by anybody.
Gets trucked by Cormier. And Cormier would probably... The only person in the division that I think... Two people in the division that I think Cormier has trouble with is Alistair Overeem and Junior Dos Santos, and I'd still say that he would be a live dog in both of those fights.
You mispronounced Stefan Struve really badly there. Stefan Struve.
I said Junior Dos Santos and Alistair Overeem.
Well, wow, you see, you're still fucking it up. A 6'11" guy that's really good off his back, definitely got to change.
And would get fucking slammed on his head.
I think he'd probably just lay down and just be like, "Come here."
He would get murdered.
Well,
that would be a death in the UFC.
Dude, I know that you're wearing your conductor hat right now and driving this Daniel Cormier train. He's a really good heavyweight. I'm going to have him top 10, but I don't have him walking over these guys that are more established and have beaten guys with more impressive track records.
I think that the only other person that Cormier can't would have trouble with is Matt Mitrione.
Oh, my head hurts.
I do want to know, Matt, why you think Overeem would give him problems? Like, what specifically, style-wise, does Overeem bring that would give Dan some problems?
I think that it would be interesting to see how strong Overeem is in the clinch, because we know how strong Cormier is, but Overeem's really strong in the clinch as well. So I think that's where Overeem would present some issues for Daniel. I don't think they would be in leg kicks or in boxing, because I think Daniel has a very, very strong defensive boxing and striking game. He has really good head movement and stuff. But Daniel, when he drives into the cage, he usually drops his head down to the left, and he was getting kneed in the face by Barnett every single time he did that. Against Overeem, eating a knee to the head is probably a really bad idea. And also, I don't know how Cormier would compare to strength-wise in the clinch against Overeem, who's also really, really strong there.
Yeah, and just looking at the guys ahead of Cormier in the rankings, ignoring Barnett at 7, since that's likely to change. I assume rankings are going to be redone after this card for most people. But looking at the guys ahead of him, we got Junior Dos Santos, Alistair Overeem, Cain Velasquez, Frank Mir, Fabricio Verdum, and somehow Shane Carwin is still at number 6. There's not a guy there that, I'm not sure who I would have Cormier as a favorite against, but there's no guy there that I think presents such an issue style-wise that makes Cormier anything other than, maybe at worst a plus 150 underdog. And he presents a lot of guys a lot of problems. I think he presents Carwin and Verdum especially, and Mir, a lot of problems style-wise against those guys. But we will move forward. The other big fight on the Strikeforce card, Gilbert Melendez defeated Josh Thompson in a fight that I think went a little more competitively than people expected. You say awful, Matt. Why did you think the fight was awful?
Worst shit ever, and if anybody thinks that Gilbert Melendez is the best lightweight in the world, you're a moron.
Yeah, that was a pretty great Strikeforce card for me, I gotta be honest. It was watching two Sacred Cows get slaughtered just in a row. I wasn't there. Like, I was at my local show. You might have seen me on Twitter talking about what was going on there while watching my buddy fight up in Denver at a place where they normally have horse shows. But
like a rodeo rink?
Basically, yeah. It's an adjunct to the Denver Coliseum, which used to be, it's probably like the 5th largest venue in Denver. It's next to it. And there's a sign outside that says, if you get hurt or killed by one of the horses, it's not our fault. So that's a good thing to see when you're walking into a fight.
Right.
But yeah, it was great. I mean, Melendez, between Eddie Alvarez and Gilbert Melendez, you kind of saw, I think Josh Thompson and Michael Chandler definitely added a lot to their stature. But Gilbert Melendez is a guy that I gave a lot of shit for not signing with the UFC last February before the purchase. When he was a free agent, he decided to re-sign with Strikeforce. Maybe that wasn't such a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, Gil had absolutely not. Like, did he gas?
I don't know.
Well, if you hear his post-fight interview was all about not being motivated and crying about the lack of competition. It's like, well, you signed your own death warrant there. And then on his way out, he flinches at a fan that's booing on him to try to get he flexes on him to try to get a flinch out of him. And then his fiance slaps the guy.
Well, I don't know if she slapped him. I mean, the angle I saw, it looked like she more giving the smush. Just a hand in the face, not necessarily a slap across the face.
Oh, well then.
Also,
I mean, it's assault either way, but.
Also unrelated, but I know that that Derek, you're a Badr Hari fan. He's fighting this weekend.
Against who?
I don't know, but he's fighting in K1. They're going to be streaming it on Ustream, and that stream is $20.
Oh
So
well, that's a bargain to see Badr Hari. My nipples are getting hard just thinking about it. These
20
people that love Badr Hari so much, they just, I don't care if he stomps his head 10 times. I love that guy.
I
I
love
don't care
Badr.
I don't care if he quits on the sport 3 times this year. I want to see Badr Hari.
Badr Hari is amazing. So no, it's the K1 Rising. It's part of their Max tournament. It's $19.99, and Badr Hari is fighting Anderson Braddock Silva. I really used that one and on Head Kick Legend and called it Anderson Silva without saying Braddock to game it on SEO. But yeah, but Daniel Guida also fighting.
Fantastic. Is he fighting somebody with a name? I remember he fought at Headsy Jurges not too long ago.
He is fighting Damian Garcia, and Mirko Krokop is fighting against.
I thought he retired after the fucking
Final
fight
fight?
against
Pro-Cop final fight?
Cepho. Yeah, against Cepho.
No, that wasn't his final fight. It was just the beginning of the final fight. It's a decent kickboxing card. There's no way in fucking hell you should be paying $20 for it, though.
No. To kind of get one more point in about Melendez-Thompson, how did you guys score it? I had it for Melendez. I think I had 3 rounds to 2. I didn't think that was particularly controversial, but
yeah, Melendez pretty much won the first 3. It's always more controversial when somebody who's on the losing end wins the last 2.
Right.
Yeah, I had it 3-2, and I had it 1-2-3 Melendez, and then 4-5 Thompson.
Yeah, and you can make an argument you can make an argument that one was a draw. I saw a number of draw scorecards, and I wouldn't have disagreed with that call at all.
That's interesting. And to kind of bring this back full circle, I'm on FightMetric, and they have a full report for Melendez-Thompson. They had Melendez winning the first round 63-26 by their effectiveness score, which is a pretty not super wide, but that's a pretty significant score difference. They actually gave round 3 102-95 to Thompson. So if there was a 10-10 round by the FightMetric system, they would have probably given it to the third round. I think it's within 3 effectiveness score points is when they award a 10-10. I saw people also score first round 10-10. I didn't see it. I thought it was pretty clear Melendez. But as the fight went on, obviously Thompson became more and more effective, and by the final round, I mean Thompson put up a pretty big score of 156-63, which is I think, if I'm not mistaken, nope, the second round was more of a difference between Melendez and Thompson, but still a pretty wide margin. It actually might be pretty close. It's around 90 for each. But yeah, it's. Do either of you want to see a fourth fight between these two? Because
Never.
I don't. And one other point, Not the Face and I were on Twitter. Hey, Not the Face. He was saying that Melendez-Thompson might be the best trilogy in MMA, and I thought that was crazy because while I thought
it's insane. I can name like 3 off the top of my head that I like better, and one of them ended this year.
Who?
Or last year. It was late last year. Edgar and fucking Maynard. That's a better trilogy.
Yeah, the argument against that I got. The argument I got against that was that the first fight was really bad, but I didn't think the first fight was any worse than, any other stock fight. And the other
Thompson
2 fights,
Melendez one wasn't bad when Thompson just teeps him for 25 minutes and gets a decision.
To be honest, I've seen all 3 Melendez-Thompson fights, and none of them stand out at all. I don't understand where people are getting this idea that they were great fights.
They were horrendous.
I think Randy Couture was involved in 2 trilogies that were better than that, wasn't he? Or was it just one without?
There was 2 trilogies that were better.
Mm-hmm.
You know what was a better trilogy as well? The Godfather trilogy. And I'll say Godfather 3. Godfather 3 was better than any of it was more entertaining than any of the Gilbert Melendez Josh Thompson fights.
All right,
I would go as far as saying
that hurts.
I would go as far as saying the Rampage Silva trilogy is better.
Randy better.
Chuck Randy. If you're willing to give it to me, I think Fedor Nogueira is better. Even though that was a one-sided, I still thought that was more entertaining.
And one of those fights ended in like a minute and a half from a headbutt.
Yeah, I mean that's where you kind of have to.
3 times. I'd say the 3 times they tried putting together Josh Barnett against Fedor, and those fights never happened. I would also say those are better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So one last thing I had on my list before we get the fuck out of here. Did either of you watch the latest episode of The Ream?
No.
Really?
I've not seen one.
Really?
No, I haven't watched any of them. It's like I said, there are people that love watching that shit. I watch for the fights. I don't need all the commercials and stuff.
I mean, I just think it's a really well done piece of film, regardless of.
How did they cover his relationship with Dr. Hector Molina? Was that mentioned in the
black and white?
documentary?
Well,
Very specifically and in black and white.
Yes. They didn't really have him talking about Molina. Outside.
Shocking.
But they showed the commission hearing. They had Molina talk. Obviously, it was probably edited favorably for Overeem. But at the same time, they didn't shy away from the issue. They presented it. I mean, it was the entire second half of the episode. Now, whether or not it makes you more or less sympathetic to Alistair, I think is something that you have to watch yourself.
What are the next 9 months of the Ream going to be? Just like him training and beating up women on Danish talk shows?
Man, he's going to go on vacation.
I mean, I don't even think there's a regular schedule for him though. So they might just start collecting material until he gets back in the UFC.
What American camp is he with now?
Black Zillions.
Okay, so is he going to be there getting those guys ready for fights? Is he going to be getting ready for whatever I don't think his comeback fight's going to be a title shot now, so he's going to have to get ready for somebody else.
No, it will be a title shot, probably.
They didn't do that with Son. When Sonnen fucking fucked up his rematch, they made him fight twice before he got another title shot. They'll make Overeem fight at least once.
Yeah, I think they'll have him fight someone else.
All right, let's play the damn music. I'm done with this.
Jesus, Roth.
Like you decide.
Jesus.
I'm tired, man.
Post.
We only are supposed to go 90 minutes. We're at 97.
Erica cut his mic.
We're supposed to go 60 minutes, so he went 97.
Over it. I'm tired.
One last thing. Who should Barnett and Cormier fight next?
Them again. Fight again.
Just have them fight again? You're an asshole. Derek?
Bring in Fedor and Fat Calvin Conte.
I like it. All right, Erica, hit the music. Let's get out of here.